Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rebuilding Real Life. I'm Mike, and today I want to talk about what happens when the substance changes, but what I was trying to escape from stays the same. So I went to treatment in 2015 for alcohol. And I think I mentioned that in episode 2. And I've stayed away from alcohol ever since. And that really matters to me. I have more than 11 years without alcohol. And I don't want to tell this story in a way that makes that accomplishment sound fake or meaningless. But getting distance from alcohol was a huge change in my life. I believe staying away from it protected me and the people around me from a lot of damage that could have happened. But very quickly after treatment, I found kratom. And then years later, I found THC. So there's another part of my story from 2015 that matters to me here. While I was in treatment in California, I went to meetings and I really loved them. When I came back home to Minnesota, I tried a handful of meetings here, but they just felt different. I came in pretty open and tried to talk to people, and some of them felt more guarded and standoffish to me. I asked a couple of guys if they wanted to be my sponsor, and for whatever reasons, they both declined. And I still don't know, how much of what happened next was about those meetings and how much was about my own willingness. Some of those rooms may have honestly not have been a good fit, but I also wasn't willing to keep being uncomfortable and keep looking. The desire to drink had really left me, and part of me felt like I was fixed. But if a meeting didn't feel right, then I didn't go back. And after a handful of experiences like that, I mostly stopped trying. I really wish I could go back into those exact rooms with the mindset that I have now. Maybe they would feel completely different. Maybe I'd still decide they weren't the right meetings for me. I think both things can be true. I may not have found the right recovery community, but I also wasn't willing to keep showing up long enough to find one. This time I haven't tried every meeting either. I found a few where I feel connected, and I've held on to them. The difference is that now, if one meeting doesn't feel right, I don't take that as proof that meetings or recovery have nothing for me. I just really can't know whether staying connected back then would have changed everything. But when I stopped going, I was left mostly with my own definition of what counted as okay. I wasn't drinking, the desire was gone, and kratom seemed to help. That made it easy to believe that I was fine. I can see now that even though the substance changed, I was still looking for something that could change how I felt before I even had to deal with what I was feeling. Sometimes I wanted energy. Sometimes I wanted motivation. Sometimes I wanted my mind to just become quiet. Most of all, I wanted a way out of my emotions that I didn't trust myself to handle. This episode isn't really about saying that stopping alcohol didn't count. This episode's more about admitting that stopping alcohol didn't automatically teach me how to deal with what was happening inside me without reaching for something else. So in 2015, I proved that I could stop drinking, but this time in recovery, I'm learning why I kept needing something else to do the emotional work for me. And to understand why I held on to kratom for so long, I really have to be honest about what it seemed to give me at the beginning. Kratom didn't just help me escape difficult feelings. At first, it made me feel like a version of myself that I liked better. It helped me check out from anger, fear, anxiety, social anxiety, but it also gave me energy. It made me feel motivated and excited to do things. Social situations felt easier. Wearing the mask all day felt a little less exhausting. It seemed like I had found something that could really calm the parts of me that I didn't know how to manage and turn up the parts of me I wished I had more of. And I don't want to pretend that it never worked because that wouldn't be honest. I think if something feels terrible from the beginning, most of us don't have to build a complicated story about why we should keep doing it. Kratom seemed helpful before it became something I had to keep supplying and managing. The relief and energy were real enough that I could point to them whenever some quieter part of me wondered whether this was becoming another problem. There was also another part I didn't understand at the time. I hid it from my wife at first. That gave me something private to protect, control, and manage. I could decide how much to use, when to use it, how much to order, and how much of the truth anybody else got to see. The secrecy wasn't just an unfortunate side effect. I think it fed the same part of my brain that liked having a hidden system no one else could fully see. After my wife found out, there wasn't some huge explosion. I think she could see that I was using it as a crutch, but it didn't affect me the way alcohol had. At the time, I was still working, I was getting things done, and still seemingly doing a lot of the right things. And that made it much easier for me to call it self-medication instead of just asking whether I had simply built a more functional-looking version of the same escape. Because I could still function, I kept calling it help long after it had already become a system. So what looked manageable from the outside was really taking up a surprising amount of space inside my day. I was probably spending like a really big portion of our paycheck a month on kratom. I would buy it as soon as we got paid, and I had an exact routine for preparing it. I had these little 12-ounce bottles, and I would mix 6 of those at a time. Each one of those bottles had about a tablespoon, give or take, of kratom powder, 2 teaspoons of lemon iced tea mix, and then water. And then I would shake them and have them ready throughout the day. And it wasn't a random thing I did once in a while. It was a whole production system that I did multiple times a day. Then there was the ordering. I went through different online stores until I found one with shipping that I could predict. And I knew that if I ordered on a Wednesday, then I would probably get it Monday. If I waited until Thursday, it might not ship until Friday, and then I could be waiting another day. And if I needed it before the weekend, I had to order it a lot earlier. So if a shipping label hadn't appeared when I expected it, I was emailing the company to ask what was happening. And then once it actually did ship, I would track the package incessantly, several times a day, to make sure it was still moving and hadn't gotten stuck somewhere. There were even a couple of times when the package reached the postal carrier annex, but it didn't make it onto the delivery truck. And I knew it was sitting there, and I didn't want to wait another day. So I drove to the annex and picked it up myself. If I thought I might run out, I rationed what I had. Once I learned the vendor's processing times and the mail schedule, I ordered early and sometimes bought extra. So I almost never had to face an empty supply. And I think from the outside, none of this looked like the kind of chaos that I associated with addiction. At the time, I was working, parenting, and staying away from alcohol, but I had gotten really good at something I should have never needed to get that good at. My life had quietly become organized around making sure I never had to find out how I would feel without kratom. And I don't know whether I was really physically dependent on kratom, and I don't want to rewrite the story now just to make it sound more dramatic. But I used it every day for almost 7 years, and I rarely gave myself a break long enough to even find out. On the few occasions when I had to wait a day, I remember feeling uncomfortable and squirrely, but I don't remember clear physical withdrawal symptoms. What I do know is that the possibility of running out could make me extremely anxious and irritated. In a strange way, I think becoming so good at managing the supply protected my belief that I needed it. I almost never ran out, so I almost never had to discover what would really happen if I sat with the discomfort. The system kept proving that the system was necessary because I never really allowed it to be tested. Eventually, I wasn't maintaining all of that effort to get the original benefit. I was maintaining it so I could feel normal and keep the routine going. And by the time I started using THC in 2022, kratom wasn't really doing much for me anymore. I wasn't getting the same energy or motivation or excitement from it. I was mainly just taking it to feel normal. A lot happened during those years, including losing my job in 2019, the pandemic in 2020, a huge loss in my family with a lot of grief in 2021. And then we moved in 2022. My memory of my emotional state from that whole stretch isn't very clear. And I don't want to fill in details now that I couldn't have honestly named then. What I can remember is that I was still reactive and irritable. I still got angry at stupid little things. I held on to resentments and I took things really personal. And when my wife would ask more from me, I often took it as her trying to control me or work against me. Looking back, I think she was just asking me to do things that she knew I was capable of doing. At work, I could get a lot done, but I struggled with showing up on time consistently. I took longer breaks and I would leave early. I was functioning, but I wasn't really healthy or free. I wasn't drinking, but I was still carrying the same anger, resentment, reactivity, and the need to escape. A lot of recovery circles, I think, call that being a dry drunk. And I think that term is worth explaining because someone may have heard it before without really understanding it, or they may already recognize the feeling without having a name for it. For me, it just meant the alcohol was gone, but a lot of the thinking and behavior underneath my drinking were still very much alive. Technically, I wasn't completely sober because I was using kratom and THC, but the term still helps me describe the way I had stopped drinking without really addressing what had been happening inside of me. Kratom may have helped me put distance between myself and alcohol, and I'm grateful that I didn't go back to drinking. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was also using kratom to avoid learning how to live without chemically managing myself. By 2022, the effect had faded and the emotional problems were still there. When something else offered a stronger way to change how I felt, I was ready for it, man. When kratom stopped giving me what I wanted, I reached for something that would. If I had to describe what THC gave me in one word, it would be relief. It quieted my mind and my thoughts, and I really liked the feeling of being high. At first, once a day or a couple of times a day could really feel like enough. But then at some point, I woke up and I got high in the morning and then I stayed high all day. I don't remember the exact day or what set it off. I mean, it could have been a bad day or a disagreement or something else. I don't need to invent one dramatic reason. I just know that eventually all day, every day became normal. And within a few months, I started having what I understood to be CHS episodes. CHS stands for cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It's a condition connected to long-term cannabis use that causes repeated bouts of nausea, vomiting, and stomach pain. And at first, they might happen every few months. But by my last year of using, they were getting closer together, sometimes almost monthly. I was losing a lot of weight, and I saw blood in my urine. And I can't tell you exactly what caused every physical symptom, but I knew my body was giving me serious warning signs. And I was still struggling to stop. When I tried to quit, knowing that THC was still in the house could take over my thoughts. My mind would go to dark places. I would start doom scrolling every possible outcome. And sometimes I would unravel into what felt like a nervous breakdown. The mental spirals sometimes became so severe that using again felt like the fastest available way to make them stop. That showed me how trapped I had become. The thing causing me so much damage still seemed like the quickest way to get immediate relief. Eventually, I started thinking I needed more than therapy and my own attempts to manage it. I thought I might need treatment again, but I was really ashamed. I had absorbed this idea that THC wasn't a serious enough substance to need treatment for. A lot of times, recovery spaces can become tribal about which substances count and which ones are supposedly not that bad. but my body and my life didn't need anybody else's permission to tell me that I needed help. By the time I went to treatment, the question wasn't whether other people thought THC counted. The question was whether I was willing to tell the truth about what it was doing to me. And there wasn't one moment while I was using kratom and THC when I suddenly understood the larger pattern. That understanding came later in treatment and in IOP, when I finally had enough distance to examine not only what I had used, but how I had used it and what I expected it to do for me. None of it had seemed dramatic enough by itself. It was only when I looked at the whole pattern that I could see how much of my life had been built around making sure I had something available to change how I felt. Functioning is not the same thing as being free. Some of us can still go to work, take care of responsibilities, and live a relatively normal-looking life, while a substance quietly takes up more and more space. We can use whatever we're still managing to do as evidence that nothing is really wrong. I did that for years. Later, when I wasn't working and was doing the bare minimum with my responsibilities, I could still focus on the few things I was managing and on the fact that I hadn't gone back to alcohol. I used those things to avoid looking honestly at the rest. I hadn't gotten good at just maintaining a healthy life. I had gotten good at making sure I could keep using something to change how I felt while finding enough evidence to tell myself that I was okay. And I'm not talking about taking medication as prescribed. I'm talking about choosing substances for myself, hiding how I use them and expecting them to manage feelings that I wasn't addressing. Recovery isn't teaching me that I should never need help. I think it's just teaching me to be honest about what kind of help I need. There's a difference between using support to help me face my life and then asking a substance to help me avoid my life. For a long time, I kept choosing the second one and calling it the first. But once I could see that difference, I had to learn what to do when those same feelings showed up and there was no instant off switch. Nothing I practice now changes how I feel as quickly as getting high did. And that's part of why I think recovery is actually changing me. Sometimes I have to remind myself that feeling anxious doesn't mean I'm actually in danger. I can notice that my thoughts are racing without treating every thought like a fact. I can ask myself what I can control and what I can't. Then I try to give other people the benefit of the doubt instead of grabbing onto the worst possible explanation. If someone doesn't answer a text as quickly as I hoped, my mind can build this whole story. Maybe they're angry. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe they're ignoring me. Or maybe something terrible has changed. Instead of accepting that story as truth, I can offer other possibilities. Maybe they're busy with kid stuff, doing laundry, having another conversation, or just doing life. Maybe they never even heard the notification. I'm not replacing one certain story with another certain story. I'm reminding myself that the worst story is not automatically the true one. Especially early in recovery, slowing down and questioning those thoughts was really hard. If it didn't settle me, I might distract myself for a while, or go to bed, reach out to somebody, maybe attend a meeting or even pray. I can talk to my sponsor or therapist or recovery friends instead of appointing my fear as the only voice allowed to explain what's happening. Most of the time, I do feel better after a meeting or a conversation or even praying. But the point isn't that every tool works instantly. The point is that I can let the discomfort exist without immediately escaping it. One prayer I use is, "Hey God, please take these negative thoughts from me because they aren't serving a purpose in my life. And if something I'm thinking is true, please help me be someone who can hear that truth safely. Amen." And I like that prayer because I'm not asking God to promise me that nothing painful will ever be true. I'm asking Him to free me from the imaginary suffering and help me face real truth without falling apart. The farther I get into recovery, the quieter a lot of those thoughts have become. I still have fear and anxiety, but I don't automatically have to obey them. Sometimes none of my tools remove the feeling right away. And then my job is to simply ride the wave. And that's a lot slower than getting high, but it's also teaching me something getting high never could. I can survive a feeling without reorganizing my life around making it disappear. I can't always stop a thought from showing up, but I can slow down before I believe it or try to escape the feeling. So this week, before you reach for something to change how you feel, I want you to pause and ask yourself what you're trying to escape from. I'm not asking you to diagnose yourself or decide that every comfort, habit, medication, or distraction is an addiction. I'm just asking you to notice one moment when you desperately want something to change how you feel. In that moment, ask yourself 3 simple questions. What am I feeling right now? What am I trying to escape from? And what would help me face it honestly? Maybe the honest answer is that you need support. Maybe you need to talk with a qualified professional or call somebody safe or go to a meeting, pray, just rest and give your nervous system time to settle. Getting help isn't the problem. For me, the problem was choosing my own chemical solution and then hiding and managing it, and then calling that the same thing as getting honest help. And you don't have to figure all of this out at once. Just notice it one time this week. Name the feeling, name what you're trying to escape from, and choose one honest response that keeps you present for your life. Even if the feeling stays for a while, you just practice something that I avoided doing for years. When I think back to driving to that carrier annex, I don't only see a package. I see how much of my time, attention, and peace had become attached to making sure I never had to feel those difficult emotions without a backup plan. Recovery hasn't made me fearless or completely comfortable in my own mind, but it has given me a different way to live when fear and discomfort show up. The substance changed more than once, but what I was trying to escape from stayed the same. Rebuilding started when I stopped asking a substance to live my emotional life for me, and I became willing to do that work with God, with honest support and one uncomfortable moment at a time. And that's part of rebuilding real life. So that's all I got this week, guys. Thanks for listening. Remember, we're not perfect, just willing. Have a good one, y'all, and I'll see you next week.